Okay, but I mean, are we going for spooky or are we going for an overall cool message and not spooky? Because I don't know. I didn't understand. I have no idea. Hello beautiful bookworms, my name is Katarina and welcome to my channel, and today I am going to be doing another sort of horror talk. So if you're new to this channel, I have done one previously before, which I'm going to try and leave linked somewhere. I never remember if it's there or there, but it's gonna be there. And I did it because I read almost all of Junji Ito's works, and if you don't know, Junji Ito is a horror mangaka, so he writes and draws horror mangas. And I did a talk about all of those mangas, and people really seem to enjoy it, and I got some mangas for a new horror manga author. Well, not new because he's a 70s horror mangaka, but new to me because I had no idea who this person was, and I had this edition of his supposed masterpiece work, and I decided, so I'm going to read this and I am going to comment it, and it's going to be fun, and we're going to do sort of review horror talkish. So I don't know how many of you guys will know this since it's a more ancient classical work, but he's supposed to be one of Junji Ito's inspirations, which was one of the motives why I really wanted to pick it up and read it. And so I have thoughts. I have stuff to say, and I decided why not comment this with you and have your opinions known as well in the comments if you want. So, without further ado, let's get into this. So first of all, I have to tell you the name of the manga that I am reviewing, and that is The Drifting Classroom, and this is by Kazu Umez, and this is an edition of 3 hardback volumes with beautiful artwork, beautiful spines, beautiful covers. And this is the first volume. This is the second volume. And finally, this is the third volume of Drifting Classroom. As you can see, it has the same sort of artwork in the cover and obviously on the inside. And this is called the Perfect Edition. And it is indeed perfect because it's a beautiful hardcover. The art on the inside is amazing, and the way it collects all of the volumes of this, amazing, amazing. Now, the first thing that it's really important to understand is that the original publishing of this manga was done in 1974, so it's a 70s manga, which of course it differs a lot of the horror manga that is done today, not only in terms of art, but also in terms of the message it wants to come across, and in terms of the horror genre that will portray, and the things that will portray, and the way that the characters are portrayed, and the plot and the story. However, I'm going to approach this not as a known of the classic horror manga genre, because I am really not, since I have some failures in that. I haven't read a lot of ancient horror mangas, but I'm going to approach this in terms of what I got from the manga, some comparisons with horror mangas that I've read also, and I am also going to try and understand and explain to you the general message of this and why I do believe this is a really important work and it's really important to be known, but at the same time, it wasn't a perfect manga for me, but it wasn't at all bad either. So I have conflicted feelings on this one, and I want to explain you why. And this is what this review is going to be, so be prepared because it's going to be a mess. So, since this is very, very big and I will get a wrist failure for holding this, I am just going to hold this while I tell you what the general premise of this manga is about. So The Drifting Classroom basically tells a story of this elemental school in which there are grades from the 1st grade up to 6th grade of school. And one day, so this is in Tokyo, this is a school in Tokyo, and one day there is this sort of seismic situation, and the entirety of the school, like playground, school building, garage, everything, disappears. And the people that were in Tokyo and living in the city only see a big, big hole where the school used to be. And the people that were in that school disappear into a place that is mostly and only sand. And so the kids and the teachers will now have to face a sort of Lord of the Flies style situation in a sort of dystopic universe, we will say, because I really don't want to spoil you for the plot twist, so we will say dystopic universe, and try to survive with very poor conditions. So you will see where this is going and why people are going to die and why this is a horror, because of course people will freak out. So first of all, I'm going to talk about specifics of this manga, as in, for instance, plot, characters, and overall enjoyment. Maybe we will see where this is going. I'm just gonna try and do a thing here. So the plot of this manga is very, very basic, and the base of this is that you have these kids and these teachers that have suddenly disappeared from the place and the environment that they were used to, and they are found in sort of sandish desert without any food or water except for the one that they have in the school, and they are 682 people, I think? No, 862 people, counting students and teachers. Okay, I'm a mess at... How did I turn this the other way around? I have no idea. So, as I was saying, you have 862 people, now confirmed number, that disappeared and find themselves in very poor conditions. So obviously you know that first there's going to be panic, there's going to be hysteria, there's going to be, of course, fights for supplies, there's going to be deaths, there's going to be horrifying situations, because first is a manga, so things are going to be exaggerated to a point. And second of all, it's supposed to be creepy. It's supposed to be telling you, well, what are you going to do in a place, in an environment where you're not comfortable, where you don't have all of the things that you need to survive. Of course, if there's you alone, I don't know, maybe you can do something about it. If there's you with some other people, maybe you could do even better. But if there's you and 861 people, somebody will freak the fuck out, because of course they will. It's normal to a point. So the basic premise of the manga series, it's really exciting, it's really cool, and even though I'm not really a dystopian person, I found that with mangas, dystopias are really well done and I really enjoy reading them, and this was the case. I think this is a well done dystopia, and I think that for the overall message that it wants to commit to the minds of people, which I will get there in a moment, it's really a perfect premise, and I think it's a really perfect work. Let's not forget that this was supposed to be a manga for the 70s, and for that reason it had to shock people in a way that now is not really working, because as you are going to see in this review, the shock value and the horror value for me was extremely low. That's not because I'm an insensitive, cold-hearted bitch, which, I mean, you can discuss it, sometimes I am, but we're not discussing that. I am sensitive and I suffer for people, but it's because, first of all, the characters were not developed in a way that you were supposed to pinpoint which each and every one of them were feeling. There was no major character developments, and the characters were just 2D, and they were 2D because the overall message that the author wanted to send to you needed them to be 2D. You didn't need a three-dimensional character. You needed a bunch of character and bodies to make your assumptions correct. So that's the point where, firstly, for me, it started getting a little bit tiresome in a way. The first volume for me, it was really impossible. I believe that on Goodreads I gave it 2 stars, and you know that I don't really like to rate my books if you've been here in a while, because I feel like rating is not telling you what it's good and what it's bad of the books. But at the same time, I also feel that rating from 1 to 5 stars is not that great, because you have a lot of meandering situations in the middle and you don't get to have middle stars. But at the same time, if I was going to rate it by the 1 to 5, I would have to give it 2, because the first volume is a mess. And when you're not knowing what's going on, when you're just excited for the premise in general, and you don't have characters that you can connect to, and you don't have a steady plot, it can be very difficult to get into this manga series. The second volume was better, and the third volume was better in terms of enjoyment, but never in terms of plot. So the plot is not amazing. The plot of this manga consists in, so the kids have a problem, whatever it is, because I don't want to spoil a lot. So there's a problematic situation in this desert sort of land, dystopian land. Some of them die, Because of course, if you have 862 people, you're not expecting them to survive in a horror manga, and even less when you are in those types of conditions. So some people, they have a problem, some people die, and then right off the bat, they have another problem, and some people die, and then they have another problem. And one of the things that I enjoyed is that in the second volume, actually the author made fun of that plot recurrence, because there was this kid that was always running around and telling people, we have a problem, and people were like, okay, what the fuck is going on? And then the kid came around again, we have another situation, and people were like, okay, what is it this time? And then he said, we have a problem, and the main character just turns to him and says, what the fuck is it now? Like, I am done. And I was like, yeah, that's my feeling. That was my feeling while reading this book. I mean, why is everything so problematic and we aren't developing? But then I thought, well, they're 1st to 6th graders. Of course, everything is problematic. And even if they were older, things would be problematic as well, because you're in the fucking desert and you have no water, no food, and you're surrounded by an amount of people that really don't give a shit about what you think, and they just want to do their things on their own way. Then you have grown-ups, which grown-ups are not the focus point of this manga. Not at all. So I'm not going to tell you what happens throughout the manga, but you have to know that the focus point of this are the children, which is connected to the overall message of this manga. So, not spoiling anything at all, but the overall message of the manga is that we are destroying the earth. And that because of that, we will leave nothing to our children except sand and destruction. And if this was a message that needed to be said in 1974, it needs even more to be said now, because it is a very modern day problem, which is what I enjoy in this manga. I do enjoy when classic mangas or books or everything are still very modern time and are still adequate to our time. I don't enjoy that we are still destroying the fucking earth because it's our planet and we should be careful about it. I don't enjoy that, but I do enjoy that we can still learn from the mistakes that were done before and see that we are progressively doing the same mistakes and we are going to be fucked. So we need to stop. And I think that for that, the manga is really useful. However, in the 1970s, it could be a manga that would alert people, that would shock them, that will make them see that shit is going down and you have to stop and you have to recycle and you have to spare the water and you have to use your resources better and you have to stop killing all of the sea creatures and everything, you have to stop polluting. Yes, in the 70s, this makes sense because this type of drawings, the type of shocking that there is, the shocking deaths, all of the situations with all of the wasteland would be awesome. Right now, I don't think it's as an impactful of a manga as it was. And not because it won't shock you to the point of saying, I need to do something about this, because if you have a conscience, it will, but not in the same way. Today, in the modern era, we are very used to shock, violence, and blood, and all of that. We are exposed to violence 24/7, in my opinion. Maybe in our homes sometimes, which is something that we should discuss in a more appropriate video for that, but in our lives, in our social lives, in our personal lives, in our professional lives sometimes, and also all of the time on television. So mass media is violence, which you can argue with me on that. That's okay. But I would say that every single human being has a sort of morbid fascination with watching, for instance, terrible news. And you can say, well, no, I do that to maintain my information, to know what's going on around the world. And I agree with you. But at some point, we know that dire, terrible news fascinate people more than if we put a rainbow on television and said, well, today it rained and it made a rainbow. And people would say, well, fuck it. It's nice, but fuck it. Did anyone die today? And that's what people want to know, sadly, which speaks volumes of us as a society, but it's true. And in this manga, this is supposed to shock people that are not fully conscious and aware of all of the violence. And you can say, well, the 70s had a lot of violence. Okay, you can say that, but we weren't exposed to it every single day like a brainwashing machine. And so for me, and I do read a lot of horror, so for people that don't read horror and are not used to that, maybe it will shock them. But for me, as a horror reader, which is the point of this book, because it's a horror book, even though it's a dystopian and has an overall message of preserving your environment and your planet, it's at its core a horror manga, and you're going to pick it up if you are recommended by other people that probably read horror mangas, or for reading a horror because you want it. And for that, the overall aiming is not as great now in the modern era as it was in the 70s. And that's just my opinion, but that's how I feel. Not only that, but I do believe that the art style is great. It's amazing. Although it's not one of my favorites. It's a great artwork if you consider the surroundings, if you consider the movements of the things, if you consider the action sequences, if you consider it detailed. However, the characters, for instance, are not very detailed. And one thing that I have noticed in particular is that the adult characters are a little bit more detailed than the child characters, which could be because the child characters are representations of each and every single one of us as we grow old and as we have children and so on and so on. So they are sort of the victims of a situation, and the adults are the responsible, which is why they're a little bit more detailed, and also to present to you that children are always suffering in the same way, so they're all the same in what regards to environmental situations, and the generations will be impacted in the same way, and the adults impact the later generations in different ways when they cannot change it. I think that it's a very beautiful message that the author tries to portray. But as I say, I don't know if in modern days, and I would like to discuss this with you, if you've ever read these mangas, what have you thought about this? If you think that it's a call to action, if it's a wake-up call, if you've never thought about these situations before, which I do find impossible, but I mean, you do you. Or if you do really believe that this is, like I believe, something that wasn't meant for the modern era. So, of course, that this manga is also very specific to Japanese culture, but it does have other sort of, how do I say this, approaches to other cultures. So we have a lot of little commentaries on, for instance, technology and robotics. We have a lot of commentaries on guns and gun violence. We have commentary on massive hysteria and massive panic. We have commentary on digging railroads and fucking the environment in a general way. We have a lot of commentary on the movements of tectonic plates. We have and we have a lot of triggers as well. So if you are easily triggered, first of all, I don't feel like the violence that is portrayed in this manga is over the top, since you don't see clearly the details, for instance, of guts coming out, or I don't know, more, you know, if you've read more modern like horror mangas, you will know what I'm talking about. So you don't see a lot of body horror, which is for once one of Junji Ito's main sort of artwork and writing style. It's body horror. So you don't see that in here because this is convinced in portraying a message and not on the psychological sort of horror. It's a dystopian horror, which is completely different, and I would say that my favorite is psychological horror, but I can appreciate a good dystopian horror and a good Lord of the Flies sort of plot, which is what this one is. And yeah, I think it was well done. So, but you do have a lot of triggers, for instance, for violence from kids to adults and adults to kids. You have a lot of violence from bigger kids to smaller kids and vice versa. You have a lot of nasty, monstrous creatures, which makes sense to a point. You have a lot of like children screaming for their parents, which it's disturbing. I think it's the most disturbing part of this book. It's when you are reminded that your characters are actually first to sixth graders is when they call for their mothers, and that is really disturbing. Like I was reading it and I was like, yeah, sure, this is cool, but it's not disturbing. And then one of them would decide, like one of the sixth graders would decide to just go like, I need my mom. And I was like, oh shit, they're kids. Because you sort of forget, because everything is just turning to shit, and you sort of forget that your main characters are kids, which is sort of the point. Because when you are reminded that they are kids, it hits you even worse in the feels. And I think that was one of the things that was greatly done, which there are a number of things that are greatly done, as I have said. But I think that for me, the major problem that I had with this manga is the pacing. The pacing is really, really fast. You have no time to just think about your characters. And of course, I already told you that I think that is on purpose. But I think that you need a little bit of a pull, because the plot on itself, it's not sufficient to pull you in. Like, you only discover the reason why the school disappeared and went God knows where. Well, I know where, but I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to spoil you. You only know that at the end of the 3rd volume. And one of the things that I want to say is that I don't believe these volumes need to be so big. These are 3 volumes that have 760 pages, more or less, each. And for the story that you're trying to tell, I think it's too long. I think that Kazuo Umezu could have done this smaller. And yes, it's me saying that I want a book to be small. Are you fucking surprised? Because I was as well, and I think that I should be demoted and just unsubscribe to me. I don't know. I was just joking, but it's true. I mean, I love big books, and I cannot lie. You motherfuckers can't deny. As I was saying, I love big books, but I also love good plot structure and good pacing. And if a book does not have that, maybe if you cut it a bit, it will. And I think that the major problem of this book is how fucking long it is, and how it has some interludes of things that you don't really care about, because you just want to know, first, how did the school disappear and appeared in God knows where, as I've told you. Second of all, if they are able to come back to where they were before or not. And third of all, if they're all going to die or not, because that's what you want to know. When you read this, that's what you want to know. Of course, then you see the overall message about environment and protection and how we are fucking destroying the world. And that's interesting. But before you get there, it's a societal criticism, but I have seen it better done. However, I do believe that if we didn't have something in the back like this to put forward new books with the same idea and to make it better, the concept wouldn't exist. So I think that this book, this series, is important for that. I don't regret reading it. Hell, I have a conversation with my boyfriend and I told him that I might reread this someday. I might. It's not my favorite manga series at all, but I think it's important and I would recommend for that. There's blood, there's a little bit of gore, that's a little bit of insects and creepy things, and there's of course a lot of societal criticism, there's gun violence, then there's abuse, there's burning people alive. Also, there's a mention of a plague, which I thought was very modern day, even though it's the Black Plague, but we've heard news about the Black Plague in 2020, which 2020 is just a motherfucking year, I tell you that. But it's very modern. It's very, you can see this in nowadays. And I think that's important. And for that, I would recommend reading this, because for that, it is indeed a masterpiece. However, for pure enjoyment, for pure, I want to read something horrifying and just enjoy it, and I want to know plots, and I want a good pacing, I cannot in good conscience say that you're going to find that here, because you're not going to find a good plot structure or a good pacing. However, when you get used to it, it can be fun. I spent the first entire book laughing at some of the stupidities that were happening. And that's fine, because I enjoyed it. Then the second and third book made me think, which was cool, and I enjoyed it. It's not my favorite, but I would say if you want to read a social criticism, even though it's not the best that I would recommend, it's a good manga, it's a good series. I just think it's too long, and I would really enjoy to hear your opinion if you have read this ever. if you think that it's too long, if you don't think it's too long, like, what is your feelings about this? Because I am very excited to discuss this with people, but I have seen that not a lot of people have read this, especially this edition, since I understand because it's a little bit big and heavy. I don't know. So without getting into a lot of spoilers here, I'm just going to mention some of the things that I didn't enjoy. There's a lot of God ex machina situations in this which are not plausible, and you would argue with me that dystopian futures are supposed to be a warning and not plausibility. Plausibility? What? Well, I need a dictionary. As I was saying, dystopian futures are not supposed to be a possibility. Well, they're supposed to be a possibility, but in a warning style, and not a possibility like, let's go and fuck up our society, and this could exactly happen. However, I do think that the difference between an actual horror novel or manga and a supposed dystopian is that the dystopian should be more plausible than an all-right, downright horror, which is not really the case in here. You have God ex machina situations. If you don't know, God ex machina situations are when something very implausible happens and a character gets saved because fuck you, that's why, which stuff happened here like that, and bitch what? I was so angry. I was so fucking angry. And you have a lot of situations like with telepathy sort of things, which I'm not going to tell you what they are. Discover for yourself. But I was like, are you fucking serious? This does not make a fucking sense. Which, I mean, I guess the important part wasn't the plot here, was the message, as I've said 150 times. But it still annoyed the fuck out of me, and I was annoyed. So yeah, overall, to wrap up this almost 30-minute long shit, like, what am I doing? I'm sorry, I bet you left already. To wrap this up, this manga series is important. I do recommend that if you want to view this as a social criticism, which it is, as a warning for the future, which it is, as something to be consulted and to be read and to be seen with the eyes of a social criticism, you should go get it. However, if you want a horror that will purely be enjoyment and plot and characters and whatever, that's not what you're gonna get. So you have to approach this not as a normal horror manga, but as a dystopian warning horror manga. And that's all that I'm going to say. So do I recommend this? I do. I think that people should read this once in their lives. If I recommend you to buy it and to keep it forever and ever and to reread it 3,000 times, I don't know if you will want it. And that's my honest opinion. I will probably reread it one day, maybe. But I can see why people wouldn't. It's too long. And I think it's too long. And for me to be saying this, I mean, yeah. So that's going to be it for this video. I would really enjoy if you've ever read the series or if you know any of the works of the author, because I've only read this one, so I cannot do a complete review on the author as I did with Junji Ito's video again. I would urge you to please comment and tell me what you feel about the author in general or about the series in general, because I would really love to discuss this with other people. I couldn't get into spoilers because if you want to read this, I think that it wouldn't be fair for you to know some of the stuff that you were discovering, because discovering the stuff is the only thing that stops it from being a repetitive plot. So you should go without knowing anything. But yeah, I would really love to talk to you and know what you think about it. So that's going to be all for today, and happy readings to you all. Bye!